He walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom not as a defendant, but as a legacy. The badge on his chest glinted under the fluorescent lights, the same badge his father once wore as a decorated police officer. Heads turned, some whispered. The son of the late Sergeant Cole Murphy, standing before the judge on a charge of reckless endangerment. He didn't flinch when the clerk read his name. Instead, he tapped the badge with pride, as if it granted him immunity. But Judge Caprio's eyes didn't see a badge. He saw the weight of a fallen man's honor being tested. What happened next left the entire courtroom silent. Cole Murphy Jr. was the kind of man who grew up saluted by neighbors long before he'd ever earned a uniform. His father, Sergeant Cole Murphy Sr., had been a legend in Providence, a cop whose name still echoed through precinct halls and whose framed portrait still hung above the roll call board. 2 decades earlier, he'd fallen stopping an armed robbery, taking a bullet meant for a store clerk. The city never forgot. A mural still watched over downtown, a painted badge beneath the words, "The Badge of Honor." But Cole Jr., he wore that legacy like armor, and sometimes like entitlement. He'd joined the force young, the department eager to welcome the son of a hero. But the shine faded fast. Complaints, attitude, and one body cam clip that turned into a social media storm. The footage showed him barking orders at an elderly driver, his father's name invoked like a weapon. When he appeared before Judge Caprio that morning, the charge, reckless driving through a school zone, wasn't the real headline. The real story was pride colliding with accountability. He arrived in full uniform, though suspended from duty, the brass buttons polished, the badge gleaming defiantly on his chest. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse. Reporters whispered, "Sergeant's son faces Judge Caprio." Inside, the courtroom held its breath. Caprio glanced up from the file, eyes narrowing slightly at the familiar surname. For a fleeting second, memory replaced judgment. The funeral, the folded flag, the widow's trembling hands. Now the son stood where ordinary defendants stood, wearing the same badge that once symbolized sacrifice. The weight in the room changed. It wasn't just another hearing, it was legacy on trial. And before a single word was spoken, everyone could feel it. "Mr. Murphy," Judge Caprio began, voice calm yet edged with gravity, "you're charged with reckless endangerment, driving 78 miles an hour in a 25-mile zone near St. Helena Elementary School. What do you have to say for yourself?" Cole crossed his arms and leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I wasn't endangering anyone. I know how to handle a vehicle. I've been trained." The judge's brow lifted slightly. "Trained," he echoed, "doesn't mean exempt." Cole chuckled under his breath. "Come on, Judge, you know who my father was. 30 years of service. Saved lives in this city. I think that counts for something." The courtroom murmured, some in sympathy, others in disbelief. Caprio's voice softened, but his eyes stayed sharp as glass. "Yes," he said quietly, "I knew your father. I remember the day we buried him, but I also remember the man, and he never once used his badge to justify a mistake. He used it to correct one." The smirk faded. Cole shifted, his fingers drumming on the table. "Maybe if people respected officers more, I wouldn't have to be here in the first place." That was when Caprio fell silent, a pause that lasted longer than comfort allowed, the kind of silence that made the fluorescent lights hum louder. Finally, he spoke, every word deliberate. "Respect," Caprio said, "is not a right you inherit. It's a debt you pay forward." No one moved. Even the bailiff, arms folded by the wall, lowered his gaze. Caprio leaned back, exhaling through his nose, then motioned to the clerk. "Let's see what really happened that day." The large monitor flickered to life, and as the courtroom lights dimmed slightly, everyone knew this was the moment the story would stop being about a speeding ticket and start being about the truth. The courtroom lights dimmed as the screen flickered to life. A moment later, the dashcam footage filled the room, grainy but clear enough to make every heart stop. Cole's cruiser tore down a quiet neighborhood street, the digital speedometer screaming 78 miles per hour. The camera shook as it hit a bump. Children in Navy uniforms were stepping off the curb, laughing, backpacks swinging. The crossing guard's whistle pierced the air. One sharp blast, followed by her panicked shout. Then came the gasp. The car missed the group by inches. A blur of motion, a shadow of disaster that didn't happen only by luck. Cole's hand on the wheel stayed steady. He didn't even slow down. Then the sound, his own voice, calm and casual through the in-car microphone. "They'll move, they always do." Those 6 words cut through the silence like a blade. When the footage ended, no one spoke. Not the clerk, not the prosecutor, not even the hum of the ceiling fans dared interrupt what had just been witnessed. Caprio's hands were clasped in front of him, fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. He waited, 5 seconds, maybe 10, before leaning forward. His voice was softer now, almost sorrowful. "Mr. Murphy," he said, "your father used to walk that same block after his shifts. He held the hands of children crossing that very street." Cole's throat worked, as if trying to find words that weren't there. None came. Caprio's tone didn't rise, but each word landed heavier than the last. "Wearing his badge while driving like that? It's not tribute." He paused, eyes fixed on Cole. "It's theft." Cole's complexion drained, a faint tremor in his jaw. The badge on his chest suddenly felt heavier, as if it carried the weight of judgment itself. In the back row, a woman, an officer's widow, lowered her gaze. A veteran exhaled through his nose and shook his head slowly. No one dared clap or whisper or even breathe too loud. The room fell silent. And in that silence, Cole Murphy Jr. realized his father's honor had just been called as witness against him. Judge Caprio didn't move for a moment after the footage ended. The air was still heavy with disbelief. Then, almost gently, he said, "There's one more piece of evidence." The clerk stepped forward, handing him a worn, yellowed envelope sealed in a transparent case. Caprio adjusted his glasses and held it up for the court to see. "This letter," he began, "was written 20 years ago by your father, Sergeant Cole Murphy, to the Providence City Scholarship Committee." He glanced at Cole, whose brows furrowed in confusion. Caprio continued, "He wrote it the week before he was killed in the line of duty. He nominated a boy from the same neighborhood you sped through." The judge unfolded the letter with deliberate care, the paper fragile, the ink faded but still legible. Then, in a voice that carried through every corner of the courtroom, he read, "If my son ever wears this badge, I hope he remembers it's not a shield from judgment, but a promise to protect those who cannot defend themselves." The words hung in the air, echoing longer than any gavel strike ever could. Cole blinked hard, his composure cracking. His jaw trembled as he looked down at the badge pinned over his heart. Suddenly foreign, suddenly heavy. Caprio folded the letter and placed it gently back into its case. His tone softened, almost paternal now. "This badge," he said, "was never meant to make you untouchable. It was meant to make you accountable." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air itself seemed to pause in reverence. From the back row, a quiet sob broke the silence. A police widow clutching her late husband's medal. Every eye turned toward Cole Murphy Jr., the son of a hero, now facing the reflection of that hero's words. And for the first time since walking into that courtroom, Cole had nothing left to hide behind. Caprio's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every oath he had ever heard sworn in that courtroom. "Cole," he said quietly, "what you did wasn't just dangerous. It was betrayal." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The single word, betrayal, hung in the air like a verdict all on its own. Then, as he often did, Judge Caprio shifted the lens outward, turning one man's mistake into a lesson for everyone watching. "Every symbol of service," he began, "can become a symbol of pride or of shame." He leaned slightly forward, the lines around his eyes deepening with age and conviction. "Access," he said, "is not for auction. Heritage is not immunity, and mercy," his gaze locked on Cole, "is not blind." The 3 sentences landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples of truth expanding in every direction. Even the cameraman seemed frozen, caught between duty and awe. Cole swallowed hard, nodding faintly, his voice barely audible. "I thought I was honoring him." Caprio's reply was immediate, gentle, but unyielding. "You don't honor a man by imitating his power, son. You honor him by repeating his kindness." He let that line sit, 5 seconds of silence that felt like absolution and sentence combined. Caprio continued, softer now, almost to himself. I've seen men hide behind titles, uniforms, money, and names, but the truth finds them all the same. A badge doesn't define a man, the heart behind it does. Cole wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, his composure unraveling in front of the quiet crowd. The judge's final words came like a benediction, not a punishment. Your father's name doesn't need defending, Cole. It needs living up to. Every day you choose between the weight of that badge and the grace it stands for. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Even the cameras seemed to stop recording, as though the moment didn't belong to television anymore. It belonged to truth. When the gavel came down, it didn't echo like a hammer of judgment. It rang like the toll of realization. This wasn't just a sentence, it was a mirror. Mr. Murphy, Judge Caprio began, voice measured but resolute. Justice is not about humiliation. It's about restoration. So your sentence will not take place in this courtroom. It will take place on the very street you forgot to respect. Cole lifted his head slowly, eyes red, as the judge continued. You will perform 200 hours of community service at St. Helena Elementary, the same street you endangered. Each morning you will assist the crossing guard you ignored. You will walk those children across the road safely one by one for 8 consecutive weeks. The murmur that rippled through the courtroom was soft, almost reverent. This was not punishment by paperwork. It was a moral reset. Caprio leaned forward slightly, his tone now lower, intimate. And before each shift, you will take that badge. He gestured gently toward Cole's chest. And you will not pin it there. You will hold it in your hand, over your heart, because that's where your father carried it. Not for power, but for purpose. Cole nodded, his shoulders trembling as a single tear rolled down his face. The defiance that had once defined him was gone. In its place stood the quiet humility of a man finally seeing himself clearly. Reporters in the gallery froze. Pens still, cameras unmoving. No one wanted to break the sacred silence that followed. Caprio set down his gavel and said softly, almost like a prayer, "Let this service remind you, Mr. Murphy, that redemption doesn't erase mistakes. It earns forgiveness, one act at a time." And just like that, the courtroom understood. This was no longer about guilt. It was about grace. Weeks later, the headlines began to sound different. The same news outlets that once plastered disgraced officer's son faces Judge Caprio now ran a new story. Officer's son redeems father's badge through service. Every morning, just after sunrise, Cole Murphy Jr. stood at the crosswalk of St. Helena Elementary in a bright neon safety vest, waving cars to slow down, guiding small hands across the same asphalt he once tore through at 78 miles an hour. Rain or shine, he was there, gloved hands, steady eyes, no badge on his chest. He didn't wear it anymore. He carried it in his pocket. The first few days, parents kept their distance. Some recognized him, whispering, watching carefully. But over time, the whispers changed. He smiled now. He bent down to tie a little boy's shoe. He waited until the last child crossed before leaving his post. By the second week, the crossing guard, a woman he'd once nearly ignored, brought him coffee in a paper cup that read, "Thank you." By the fourth, students were greeting him by name. And by the end of the 8th week, Cole had logged 214 hours of service. 14 more than required. He didn't stop when the sentence ended. He kept showing up, not because the court demanded it, but because conscience did. That same month, the city held its annual memorial for fallen officers. Cole stood quietly among the rows of uniforms, a single badge in his palm, his father's. When the wreath was carried forward, he stepped up and placed it there himself. Reporters pressed forward afterward, microphones ready. "How does it feel, Mr. Murphy, after everything?" Cole looked down at his empty hands, then at the children playing across the street, and said softly, "It finally means what it used to mean." The clip went viral. Millions watched, many with tears in their eyes. But for Judge Caprio, it was never about headlines. It was about one man remembering what justice truly is. Not punishment, not pride, but redemption lived out one morning at a time. In the end, Judge Caprio looked into the camera and said, "Public service is not a privilege to flaunt. It's a promise to fulfill." The courtroom applauded quietly, a sound less of celebration and more of relief. The badge, once a symbol of arrogance, had become a lesson in humility. If you believe no name, no rank, no legacy stands above the law, subscribe for more stories where justice isn't just delivered, it's earned.